You know, there's a lot of noise out there right now, the media, politicians, and even the Sunday BBQ conversations, which seem to revolve around one central villain, the property investor. Apparently, we're property investors, we're to blame for housing unaffordability, for rising rents, for locking young people out of the housing market. But is that really fair? Because when you scratch below the surface, you realise that property investors aren't the problem. In fact, we're a critical part of the housing solution. So today I'm joined by Brett Warren, National Director of Metropole Property Strategists, and my business partner. And we're going to have a frank conversation about why property investors are essential for Australia's housing market and what people get so wrong about us. Now, yes, we are biased, but we're going to talk about how investors house millions of Australians, how much we contribute in taxes, and why policy decisions that punish investors could end up hurting the very people they're supposed to help. So if you're an investor feeling a bit misunderstood or simply curious about how the system really works, you're going to get a lot out of our show today. So let's get on with it.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Welcome back, Brett.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be on the show again.
Well, Brett, there seems to be a lot of anti-investor sentiment floating around lately. Have you noticed that too?
Absolutely. It's almost becoming fashionable, isn't it? Particularly in politics, rather than, I guess, making excuses, they're kind of pointing the fingers and completely ignoring the value and the service that we're actually providing for the community and the economy as well.
Well, it's frustrating because the narrative has become very one-sided, ignores that property investors in Australia are providing a service. About a third of Australians rent, and they're not being supported by the government. In the past, the government created a lot of social housing. In the 1990s, 5% of all accommodation was social housing. Now it's actually about 4%, even though more people need social housing. In other countries, though, the government provides accommodation, not just for social housing, but in Europe and in England for everyday people. And so therefore, there isn't a need for property investors. But in Australia, a third of Australians rent, not always because they can't afford to buy, but somebody has to provide the accommodation, and that's what property investors are doing. And most are not rich property moguls, the everyday Australians trying to get ahead financially. The government's offered them an opportunity. Hey, run a small business, provide a service. So they're not hoarding 20 properties. Most have just got one or two.
Well, that's what the statistics will tell you. 92%, I think, own up to 2 properties. But let's not get the facts in the way of a good story, Michael. And that's what the media tells us. Every property investor's got 20 properties and they're hoarding those properties for everyone else and missing out on opportunities. So I think that's the message that's being put forward. But in reality, we are providing a very, very valuable service. And without it, I think there'd be even more problems, wouldn't there?
Well, we're paying a lot of taxes too, and we'll go into this. But why do you think that's happened at the moment? Why are investors such an easy target for politicians and for the media?
Well, it's almost like they're beating it up and making it emotionally charged in one direction. And I guess that's politically convenient because the politicians can point the finger, they can increase taxes, they can raise things without all these things slipping under the radar. In reality, there's been these decades of poor planning and underinvestment in social housing to begin with.
So it's easy to blame the investors, and the migrants, too, it's their fault. So we often hear of investors making housing unaffordable for first home buyers. How would you respond to that claim, Brett?
Well, this is not true. I mean, investors don't set house prices. The market does that. In fact, we often add supply by, funding new builds. We've got developers that do that. And ironically, when investor activity is low and rental supply tightens and rents rise, that's exactly what hurts tenants. So we should be maybe encouraging these types of people to provide these types of properties rather than, I guess, shunning people away. And there has been a lot of people moving away, hasn't there, Michael?
There has been. Now, there's no doubt that investors invest in much the same price range as a lot of first home buyers. Often they do that because they think cheap properties are good investments. That's not necessarily the case. Even though over the last couple of years, the lower end of the market has performed very, very strongly. But in fact, house prices are set by the market, as you say, and the cost of new accommodation. And, recently we had Tim Reardon, the chief economist of the HIA, on the podcast to explain that 50% of the cost of a new home in Sydney is taxes, government taxes, local government taxes, levies for development levies and open space levies and water and sewerage. And then there's state government taxes, which include stamp duty. And there's big land tax in state governments. And then there's federal government taxes, including GST. And that's just for building a house. If you end up looking at building apartments where there's unions involved and cranes and scaffolding, it's a lot more expensive. So it's the replacement cost of the new dwellings that we need to provide that means that older established properties have to increase in value as well. So it's not necessarily ugly, greedy investors doing it, is it?
No, it's not. And I guess that's the hard part. It's so easy to blame investors and rather than, I guess, taking it on the chin and providing solutions to move forward with.
Now, investors provide a service, they provide accommodation that renters rely on. But interestingly, there was a report by the AHURI, which is a government authority, that showed that a lot of tenants do not want to, at this stage, buy a home. In fact, percentage thought they never would be able to afford a home, but many of them were renting because it was a temporary stopgap. They had moved to a new city, they had moved to a new stage in their life. But the other interesting fact was that 10% of renters are actually property investors themselves, what we call rent investors, Brett.
That's an interesting one. It started to take toll, hasn't it? I mean, a lot of people are probably priced out of the market, so they suggest rather than, I guess, moving out to insignificant areas where they don't want to live, they can obviously rent where they'd like to live and invest where they can afford to live. And I think that's a really positive step. And I think a lot of people, particularly younger people, are starting to come on board with that.
So why are people renting? Well, this same report from the HRU said 45% said they couldn't afford to buy anything appropriate. Now, I'm going to upset somebody listening to this, but a lot of first home buyers want to buy a median price home in our capital cities. I mean, that's what all those reports say, that you need so many years of saving of a deposit, 8 years to save a deposit for a median price house. I know I didn't start with a median price house and neither did you, but their response to the survey was, I can't find anything appropriate. And that goes to the rent vesting thing you said. So I'll not rent where I like to in the sort of accommodation I want, I can't afford to buy. Others didn't have enough deposit. Others couldn't find something. But 18% of those renting, interestingly, preferred to rent, and others, 14%, could afford to buy a better quality dwelling when renting, so they were saving up to get to the next level. Others, 11%, said they can't afford to live in the neighbourhood where they want to. I guess that's again a matter of choice. Others, because of relationships, it gave them flexibility. 7% said they're renting because they're wanting flexibility at the moment. They're not ready to put down their roots. And 5% rented because of vocational reasons. Some were for study, like students, and others for jobs. So somebody has to provide the accommodation for those people, Brett.
Yes, they do. And that's obviously something the government isn't focusing on and isn't doing, and that's something investors are doing in a large amount and providing this kind of service. And I guess that's getting missed out in the equation, isn't it?
And if we all sold up tomorrow, like some of the greenies would like us to do, or stop buying, what would happen to the rental crisis? These people don't want to or can't afford to rent there, and it's not going to suddenly drop the value of properties.
We saw this over COVID, Michael. The rent rolls over COVID, there was reports over COVID that out of 100% of properties that went on the rent roll, 30% of those properties were bought by homeowners as well. So there was only 70% returning to the rent roll, and here we are 2 or 3 years later with a significant issue in our rents and a shortage of rents and not enough properties being built. So that's exactly, we've kind of had a taste of that, haven't we?
We have. Now, some people are saying, it's not fair. Property investors can negatively gear, but so can anyone in business if the cost of running your business is for a year or two more than the cost of the income that you're getting from it, not the cost, I should say, then you can write off that as negative gearing against other income. And people are talking about the capital gains tax advantages that property investors get. But I know, Brett, you and your team had put some numbers together and suggested that, in fact, investors contribute over $40 billion a year in taxes. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, look, we're not only providing a service, but we're also, I guess, paying governments and giving governments. And at the moment, we've been, I guess, being used as a bit of an ATM. But first of all, we're looking about $4.5 billion to go to the councils with the council taxes. There's $14 billion for land tax, and obviously there's some significant changes there, particularly in Victoria, that's going to bring that up as well. Stamp duty is another one. There's a lot of talk about stamp duty. There's some concessions for entry level and home buyers, but that's $6 billion. And as you pointed out, last of all, the biggest one is the capital gains, and that's raking in $20 billion a year. So, I think that's not only providing a service for the community, but it looks like we're providing a service and another bank for the politicians and the government, right?
And then there's the ongoing taxes. Every year, investors, not homeowners, pay land tax annually, as you said. So it's ongoing. It's not a one-off. And that's over $15 billion. And that's almost entirely from landlords.
Yeah.
It's not from homeowners.
Yeah.
These are local taxes, the council taxes. Now, I'm not complaining that we have to do that, but somebody's got to pay for the garbage collection and the road and the other council services. And I don't know, for a typical investor, that's $1,500, even up to $4,000 a year. Apparently, that means investors contribute somewhere between, $6 to $8 billion annually to local governments. And then there's GST paid directly and indirectly on all the, well, if you're buying a new property, there's GST, and then there's all the other things. It's a bit hard to pin down how much GST is paid along the way for service providers when you've got a property. In other words, property investors pay upwards of $40 billion a year in taxes. That's not rorting the system like the people are telling us. That's funding the system in my mind, Brett.
It absolutely is. And that maybe there should be, it's just like a business incentive, isn't it? As the government provides you with that capital gains, and it's a fair tax and people are prepared to pay it. But I think at the moment they're tickling around the edges and pushing a lot of people out of that space. And that's going to create serious problems moving forward for the people who are affected the most.
Well, so I guess my message, and you can see I'm getting excited about it, because I don't think it's fair. Property investors are contributing to hospitals, to schools, to roads, to local infrastructure, to social services. I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining.
No,
At the same time, we're housing a third of the country. All I'm saying is, I'm not complaining about it. I'm saying, stop blaming us when we're actually helping. The reality is Australia needs property investors in the current system, and the government just can't afford to or want to or has the capacity to provide accommodation. Now, that's probably a part-time, a short-term fix. I'd like it to be providing more accommodation. It's actually supplying tax benefits to overseas corporations to provide build-to-rent accommodation, which is not going to be affordable accommodation. But stop picking on us, Brett.
It would be nice, Michael, and maybe just some balance. I think you're not talking about anything too dramatic. Maybe just providing a bit of balance out there. And this is the podcast about educating and helping people understand the service that we're actually providing. And hopefully people don't get too beaten up by things they hear in the media.
Well, we see a wide spectrum of property investors in Australia. So at Metropole, we help investors grow, protect and pass on their wealth by putting a strategic plan together for them and helping them, I guess, plan to become the people they plan to become and then helping them implement it. And we see tradespeople, we see young people, we see teachers, nurses, tradies, small business owners. Sure, we've got a lot of high net worth clients as well, but there's a lot of ordinary Australians just trying to build a better financial future for their families, Brett.
And I think that's what it really is. And that's what we love doing. We love helping people. We love helping people create that wealth and build wealth for their family. It's not about going out and buying 20 properties in 20 minutes. It's really about buying 2 or 3 really good assets over a longer period of time. And the majority of Australians, 92, 93%, only own 1 or 2 investment properties. So there's no balance provided in that argument.
No, there isn't. So I've got the statistics in front of me here, and you're right. 71.5% own 1 investment property. Another 18% own 2 investment properties. 5.8% own 3. When it gets to 5 investment properties, it's less than 1% of all investors, and only about 20,000 investors in all of Australia, according to the tax department figures, own 6 or more investment properties. Interestingly, we recently did an audit of the results of our client at Metropole and found that they were 7.3 times more likely than the average investor to own 6 or more properties. Now, I guess they make the right decisions because they got the right advice. So it is possible to grow a substantial portfolio, but the aim of that is not to take advantage of landlords. Our clients own of tenants. Our clients own good properties, have good property managers in general property, Metropole property management looking after them, providing high quality accommodation, responding to tenants' requests and giving people security of income because our clients are long-term investors. They don't want to kick the tenant out in a year's time.
No, that's right. They're interested in providing stable homes for the longer term. And as you said before, there's so many different categories of people wanting to rent and still wanting to rent. Not all people who are renting are being forced out of the market. They're doing so by choice. And I think that the investors are providing that.
So do you think the government could ever realistically replace the role of investors in
Absolutely
Australia?
no chance. No, the government, look, they haven't even built enough properties as it is. And, they're not building any more social housing. I guess if we leave it up to them, there's going to be skyrocketing homelessness and huge issues with rents and just standard rents. So, investors are the ones bridging those gaps. People are building those build to rents and creating social housing. But it's just the mum and dad investors and the average people that are trying to get ahead, and they're playing a key role in that. And if they take that away, there's going to be some serious issues.
So what would you say to somebody saying, scrap negative gearing, it's not fair? If you scrap that would level the playing field, what do you think?
Well, it's not a handout, is it? It's a tax deduction for running a business in a way. And I think, if you're going to take that away, the way the system is, there's going to be less people getting into investing. And that's just going to create more of a housing crisis. Less investors, more people buying properties. But there's just an undersupply and there's not enough being built. So I think they'll have some serious repercussions there.
So I know you've got a vested interest, as do
Yeah.
I, but what would you say, looking ahead, the role of investors have in solving the housing crisis, the rental crisis that people are talking about at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think we don't want to squash that Australian way of life, wanting to improve ourselves and having a fair go and making a difference in our own life by helping others. And I see that as investors as playing that role. And at the moment, we need more supply. And to do that, we also need demand. And they're just not building enough of the right type of properties in the right types of locations. So we probably need more of a bit more certainty, more fairer tax policy, and planning systems that encourage people to do that, not, put that the other way and take people out of the market.
Yeah, investors, as we say, help fund all these things that the government is planning to do to make Australia a better place to live. But I know at the moment some investors feel under siege, they're worried, and they're coming asking you and your team, is it still worth it? Should I get out? What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, you just have to pick up the newspaper and it's bash the investor, land taxes are going up, or we're being greedy, whatever it may be. So, look, it absolutely is. I mean, it's a game. Property's a game, and you've got to understand the rules of the game. And from time to time, the game changes, rules changes, penalties change. You've got to understand that. You've got to be with people who understand that. And I guess taking those longer term fundamentals and long term viewpoints take a lot of that out of it. It's a lot tougher these days. There's a lot more regulations, a lot more hoops to jump through. But if you know what you're doing, you've got someone by your side, there's those opportunities and you can still get the same outcomes that we did many decades ago.
Well, again, investors are doing this because they know the government pension is uncertain in the future, that most people's superannuation isn't enough. So they're set up a business providing accommodation for people who want it and are prepared to pay for it. And in the process of running a small business, taking a financial risk, taking on commitments and hoping that at the end there's going to be a profit that's going to give them the level of financial freedom. Now, we've already said the majority of investors never get that because they never get past their first or second property. But I, like you, think that if more are getting out of the market at the moment, it just is going to leave more in it for those who stay and have the long game. So we did a podcast recently where you talked about the benefit of having financial buffers in place. You've got to have the ability to see yourself through the ups and downs. And it's actually hard to do on your own. That's why you and I have mentors in business and why you and I help our investors at Metropole when they've got these concerns, just to talk about it. And often it just needs a steady conversation with somebody who's been around the block a couple of times and they say, yeah, look, I agree with you. No, it was a knee-jerk reaction. I don't really want to sell that property.
No, that's right. And we've been through these cycles before. It's, for some people, it's new and it's scary and, unexciting. And for us, it's, something that just happens and it's just part of the game and part of the course. So we've got to help you charter through that, get through that period and get through to greener pastures. And by, not listening to the last news outlet or the last bit of newspaper, focusing on that longer term and pushing through and having someone there to bounce those ideas off and come up with those things is really invaluable.
Now, it's interesting because what you said is right. Having been around the block a few times, you have a different level of perspective. During property booms, the media is all positive. There's all the positive signs. Everyone's excited and things do really well. And during downturns, and we've had some challenging times economically with higher interest rates and with geopolitical problems, during downtimes, the media is very negative. And at the moment, we're at the transition stage where things are turning. There's a mixture of positive messages and negative messages. I've seen this before at this stage of the cycle. That also gives me confidence that our understanding is right, that we are at the next stage of the cycle. And when we spoke last time, we talked about the most recent Domain forecasts, where Domain suggested that over this coming financial year, 25-26, Australian housing is going to go up all around Australia, about 6% per annum for homes and apartments, but it's going to be very different from state to state. They believe the East Coast states in particular, Sydney and Melbourne, are going to drive the next wave of property price growth. It'll be double-digit growth. It'll be bound by affordability issues still, but the lack of supply, the strong migration, the increasing consumer confidence, the government pushing first home buyers into the market, helping first home buyers into the market, but that's going to push up property prices, all means that over the next 12 months, well-located properties will do well, but you can always outperform those averages. So if you want to understand what all this means for you, I suggest that you have a chat with Brett's team of property strategists at Metropole. Just go to metropole.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show note and organise a complimentary wealth discovery chat. Let's help you understand what's really going on in the market. Let's help you plan to become the person you plan to become and give you a balanced approach to property investment. Since we've got no properties for sale, we can give you independent advice. Metropole, we're much more than another buyer's agent. We help our clients strategically grow their wealth safely and pass it on to future generations through strategic property and wealth advice. We also have property management, development and construction, and also through Mark and Caroline Creedon, Mastermind Business Accelerator, helping small businesses. Why not go to metropole.com.au? Have a chat. Let's see how we can help you. Why don't you discover what your options are? Brett, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It's always good to chat with you and get your perspective. So I guess the bottom line is we're not driving up property prices. We're not just trying to get rich. We're providing homes. We're paying billions in taxes. We're part of an ecosystem that makes housing in Australia function. That's the system we're working in, so we're not taking advantage of it. So next time somebody blames you as a property investor, why not share this episode with them? In fact, get the facts out there. Why not tell somebody else about this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast? And as I said, if you're looking for clarity and confidence in our changing market, reach out to Brett and his team at Metropole. They've been through all these cycles and they're here to help you get it right. Thanks, Brett.
Well said, Michael. A bit of balance would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. As a way of having a little more fun in these podcasts, I'm offering each week 3 listeners or viewers an opportunity to win a copy of my best-selling book, How to Grow a Multi-Million-Dollar Property Portfolio, by entering our property trivia quiz. I'm going to ask you a question in a moment, and I'd like you then to go to propertytrivia.com.au and leave your answer. And even if you have listened to this as a slightly older episode, your entry will still count. And everyone gets a copy of a fully updated report I've done. I'll leave a link in the show notes, but propertytrivia.com.au. Now, what's the name of the government scheme that allows first-home buyers to enter the market with as little as 5% deposit? And if you know the answer, just guess. If you don't know it, go to propertytrivia.com.au and you'll have a chance to win one of my books. And even if you got the wrong answer, you'll get a report.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I want to ask you something that could be a little bit uncomfortable. What would you ask for if you weren't afraid of hearing no? Recently, I came across a story that struck me. Steve Jobs was just 12 years old when he picked up the phone and called Bill Hewitt. Yes, the founder of Hewlett-Packard. Now, the older listeners and viewers on this would remember Hewlett-Packard. So Steve Jobs was 12, picked up the phone, cold called Bill Hewitt, and asked him for spare parts for a computer project that Steve Jobs was working on. Now think about this. A kid, barely a teenager, had the guts to call the person who at that time was a tech industry giant. And he asked for help. Do you know what happened? Bill didn't just send parts, he offered young Steve a summer job. That one bold request helped shape the future of technology as we know it today. Later in life, Chief Steve Jobs reflected on this moment and said something along these lines: most people will pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates those who do things from the people who just dream about them. So let's be honest. Many of life's doors stay closed, not because we're turned away, but because we never knock. We don't ask. We just assume we're going to be rejected. We tell ourselves stories like, I'm not ready, they won't help me, or it's not the right time. But here's the truth. Closed mouths don't get fed. You might be one ask away from a mentor, from a deal, from a collaboration, or a breakthrough in your business or your investment property journey. So here's your challenge from today's mindset message. What conversation have you been avoiding? What opportunity could you unlock if you had the courage to ask? Who could help you? If only you had the guts to reach out. Rejection might sting for a moment, sure, but regrets live for a lifetime. And something only standing between you and your next opportunity could well be just simply asking for it. So again, I'll just leave you with this. What would you ask for if you were not afraid of hearing no? Do your work and then ask. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. But before you move on to the next podcast you're going to listen to, let me remind you I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher. We call that Demographics Decoded, where Simon and I unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. In my mind, this is a must-listen to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, but also for business people and entrepreneurs. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, just please stop for a second and subscribe on your podcast app where you're listening to this, or on YouTube. And of course, if you don't subscribe to this show, the Michael Yardney Podcast, why not click the link that says follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now. So twice a week, you're going to get benefit from my guests and me. And I'd like to ask you a little favour, please. If you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody who would also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney Podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Well, just tell them about it. Just have a chat with them. Now, I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing me a favour in my quest to help as many people as possible to become financially literate. And by the way, I've got a special bonus for you. As my way of saying thank you for subscribing, just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. It's just my way of saying thank you for taking the time to listen. And remember, the information that we give you in this podcast is general information, not specific information about your personal circumstances, because we don't know about them. But if you do want specific information, you can always have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au. If you really want to learn more, you can always listen to the previous podcast, the many episodes we've already published. Just go back to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success, and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney Podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?